Hello. So, they're probably wondering why I'm talking to myself and knitting, but that's their problem. It's not mine. Hello and welcome to the Not Quite Enough Yarn podcast, episode 10, October 2018. Welcome, you're very welcome. Whether you're a new viewer or a returning viewer, thank you so much for stopping by and seeing what I've been up to this month. My name's Leslie. This is a podcast from the south coast of England, and it's mostly about knitting, crochet, yarn craft, a few other crafts as well, and whatever else I've been up to during the month. Now, it's called Not Quite Enough Yarn because I have a lot of yarn but never quite enough for an entire project, so not enough in one colour. So that's the reason for the podcast name. I'm trying to reduce my stash. I have 2 cupboards for the use of storing yarn, but not all of my yarn fits into it. So this is my yarn diet. I've gone cold sheep. I haven't bought yarn since November. I still keep acquiring it. People very kindly give it to me. But in general, I'm trying to reduce the overall size of the stash. And I do that by making lots of stuff, hopefully. My name on Ravelry changed last month. I used to be called Lala with H's, but I'm now knittingordeath. And that's also my name on Twitter and on Instagram. Probably most active on Ravelry, however, and there is a Not Quite Enough Yarn podcast group on Ravelry. Not a massive amount of activity on there, but hopefully I'll rectify that. But it's a nice, friendly place to be. Now, I record throughout the month and put it all together and record and post it onto YouTube during the last weekend of the month. So that means you see me in various states of tidiness, dress, locations, but hopefully that keeps it a bit more interesting. And yeah, it's just really the bits and pieces that I do yarny wise throughout the month. And you may well be thinking to yourself, but Les, why are you wearing that gorgeous scarf? What is it? Oh, what? This old thing. This is my latest make, and it's a very simple scarf. I made it up myself, made up the pattern myself, and was really pleased with it. So I've actually posted it as a free pattern that you can access via Ravelry, and I'll also put the link in the notes down at the bottom. So this was a scarf using up some yarn that I'd bought probably a couple of years ago. The yarn is by Alpaca Select and it's called Kusi. It says on the label knits as 4-ply, so it's a 4-ply fingering weight, and there's just under 200 metres in each skein of it. So I used a 3.75mm needle. And you can see it's mostly garter stitch, but with a bit of interest. That's probably done my hair a lot of good, but there we go. So I started off with a mitre square. So just the same as you do for any kind of domino knitting. And then I picked up the stitches around the edge on 2 sides and just knitted down. Now, before I started this knitting down, I weighed the yarn that I had left and split it in 2. I'll be honest, I didn't make a perfect job of it. I'm not 100% symmetrical, but I'm pretty close to it. So having picked up those stitches, it's a simple decrease on either side and a yarn over, knit 1, yarn over in the middle, just to keep that sort of chevron-y mitre shape going. Once I'd finished that side, and by finish I mean run out of yarn, just picked up the stitches on the other sides of the square and did the same thing to match. So it's a very simple pattern, nice, easy to make, sit watching TV, you don't get lost in a complicated movie if you're watching this one. Very straightforward. I have done the written instructions, but to be honest, what I've just said pretty much covers the written instructions, except that gives stitch numbers if you want to make something near to this size. Because this is a 4-ply weight yarn, that's what I've written the pattern for, but as you can see, it's completely adaptable to whatever weight you've got, however long or wide you want your scarf to be, and it's just a really simple knit. Now this yarn is 50% alpaca and 50% acrylic, so it has a nice feel to it, not too much of a halo from the alpaca. It's actually more of a kind of lilac and pink than I think it's showing up on the screen at the moment, and this is a yellow and pink mix. But it has a nice feel to it, nice and soft without being too fluffy, so hopefully when the scarf's being worn you won't feel as if you're spitting out bits of alpaca every time you try to put a sentence together. So nice long cosy scarf. Don't know what else to say about it really. Like I say, I was very happy with the pattern, so I've written it up, and if it's of any use to anyone, please do go and help yourself. Hope you enjoy making it. This is the only one I've made. It's not been test knit. Now hopefully, because it is so straightforward, the pattern is fine, and I have obviously, you know, checked it through myself. But if there's anything in there that could be written more clearly, or just you think is wrong, please do get in touch, because I'm always happy to correct and to improve. So that's that little baby. So that will be going for the bazaar, which by the time I post this video up I will probably be at, because it's on the last weekend of October. I'm still at that, at the moment it's still the beginning of the month, so I'm still at the I haven't got enough / I've got too much stage. Who knows what I need, what's going to sell. You see all these things on Pinterest, oh, you know, things to guarantee your sales, things to make it happen, but there are factors like the weather, what else is on TV, if people want to come out or not, the location. All this stuff has an impact, and I'm just going to be really zen about it and just hope to sell stuff. But if I don't, I don't. It's okay. I've used up some of the yarn, I've made some nice things, I've made mostly scarves, and if they don't get sold they'll be sewn together into blankets, so that's very easy to sort out. Nothing wasted, nothing lost. So that's the first thrilling part of the podcast. I just would like to say a huge thank you to everyone who's liked, commented, subscribed, clicked all of the buttons down here and added your thoughts. Really am grateful. I love to read your comments. I hope that I've responded to all. Sometimes there's a big swathe of them, so you might not get much more than a thank you very much, but I really do love to see what you've written, sharing your experiences, and I'm very grateful for that. So please do add your thoughts, press the like buttons, press all the buttons. That really is much appreciated. We're getting close to 2,000 subscribers. If that glorious day ever comes, then I will be doing a giveaway, but we'll see how things go on that. There's been sort of peaks and troughs in subscriber numbers growing, and for about 3 or 4 weeks now it's been roughly the same. Growing a few, losing a few, you know, this is what happens. So yes, if we get to 2,000, I will be in shock and will need to give things away as a sign of my gratitude. But please do add your comments below, add your thoughts, add your suggestions. They're all gratefully received. Now, a few people have kindly asked about the blanket that normally sits behind me. This one, and thank you for asking. It's really not that exciting. It's just a scrap blanket. Started it many years ago, back in the day when I only knew how to make one blanket, and that was a granny square, well actually a granny rectangle. I did the, I don't know if you can see that, I didn't do it quite square in the start. I wanted it to be rectangular, so instead of doing equal numbers of squares in it, blocks into the middle circle, I did parallel, you know, too long, too short. I don't think I've so I was wondering if I'd just put in some rows elsewhere to make that even longer, but I think that's all I needed to do just to make it slightly rectangular. And it was just using up scraps. Excuse me. We had a big blanket that I'd made a long time ago called, which we call Blanky, because obviously we are 7 and 8 in this house. And this one being smaller, this is known as Son of Blanky. But I keep it up in the office for when it gets chilly in the winter. And like all blankets of this type, it becomes a memory blanket, even without trying, because you just use bits of scrap as you've got. Most of this is DK weight, which until probably 6-7 years ago, pretty much 90% of my yarn stash was DK weight. And I just used up bits and pieces. But it does become a memory blanket because you remember things you've made. So, you know, there's a colour, this this variegated pink has been used in lots of different projects. This purple here, with the purple and white sort of plied together, I made a toy elephant for my eldest sister. She loves elephants, in that yarn. And I think that's the picture on my Ravelry Ravatar. So that's that one. This one at the edge here, this kind of corally colour, that was left over from a design for a magazine. So yeah, it's just a regular granny square made up of all sorts of scraps. I've only done one official knit in public because I knit in public all the time, so I don't feel the need to go out on a particular day and do it. But I did go with some folks from our knitting group, and I took this with me, partly because we were sitting outside, so it was nice and warm. I'm not as daft as I look, you know, but then that would be tough. But yeah, it's just a useful, cosy, homely sort of blanket. And lots of memories in it, which is always nice. Now before I show you the next section, the next thing I've made, I have a confession to make. Ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce you to cupboard number 3. I didn't think this day would come, but it has. I found it as a for sale secondhand on eBay. I found it because I was looking, let's be honest, and it's just proven to be too useful. I've always said that not everything fitted in the 2 cupboards, and so it's no surprise that they fit into a 3rd. The real confession is I have another box of yarn which doesn't even fit in here, although there are gaps at the top of the shelf, so you know, let's not beat ourselves up too much. The plan is still to fit everything into 2 cupboards, and it will be this one and the one that I call cupboard number 2, which is over here. And what I intend is that what I call cupboard number 1, which is actually originally a solicitor's cupboard. Oh, you can see my reflection. Hello. A solicitor's book cupboard. So my hope is to put my knitting books in it rather than on top of it, and also to put in it my old sewing machine, my very pretty Singer from the beginning of the last century, which doesn't work but just looks fabulous. So that's the plan. I still want to use up this stuff. I'm not just resigning myself to ever increasing numbers of cupboards, but the number of boxes and bags around the place were beginning to really get me down, so it was the sensible thing to do. I'm not proud of it, but I'm glad I've got it, if that makes any sense at all. Onwards with actual knitting rather than just showing you yarn now. So having just fessed up about my latest yarn cupboard, of which I'm a little ashamed, but let's not worry too much. I have finished another item. This is, I think it's possibly the last item I'm going to knit for the craft fair / bazaar that's at the end of this month. So I'm guessing that I'll be uploading this video whilst I'm there doing, hopefully selling lots of lovely things. I'm feeling a bit done with that now. getting a bit fed up with just keep churning out scarves and cows and that sort of thing. Even though I like the individual pieces, I feel like I want to get back to some of the garments and sweaters that I've got on the go. Having said all that, there is possibly one more that I'll make depending on how I do for time. I have one on the loom, so a woven one that I'm still working on, and some of the yarn that my sister gave me last month. I've got a couple of balls of chunky purple with flecks of colour in, and I think I've got 2.5 balls of that, so I think that would make a good scarf or a cowl or something of that nature, but it partly depends on how I do for time. Back at work now, so knitting time is not infinite. Not that it's ever infinite, but you know what I mean. So this little beauty is a long cowl that I twisted for wearing. It's made out of Moina yarn. I presume that's how it's pronounced. I got 3 balls of this a couple of years ago in Cornwall on holiday. It looks a bit odd because the little bit that I've got left I've tucked inside the ball band and written on how many grams of yarn I have left. It's an incredibly soft acrylic yarn. It is 100% acrylic. Slightly unusual construction of yarn, and I've taken a still photograph because I don't think I'm going to get the right level of focus with the video camera. But it's like a kind of mesh with a foam tube through it is the best way I can describe it. But the picture that I'm showing you now will hopefully demonstrate that. And slightly elastic in its qualities, just so incredibly soft, absolutely squishy and really lovely. Now, I got 3 balls of it at the time because that's what they had. They had 3 balls of the orange colour and they had 2 balls of a very bright lime green. So I bought the orange. Now, as you can see from the cowl, there is a slight sort of variegation, self-striping, semi-solid. I'm not good on the terms of these things, but there is some variation in the colour. And it's really pretty, lovely and soft against the neck, so that's all good. All I did, I cast on a couple of 100 stitches, I think it's about 240, on a very long circular. I think this is about 100 centimetres, using 5mm needles. I'm not sure what the weight is on this yarn. The Ravelry listing shows it as sport weight, but it feels thicker than that. And certainly, given that I've used it on 5mm needles, I would expect it to look looser than it does for a sport weight yarn. So I'm not quite sure how the classification worked. I'm guessing that was probably done on wraps per inch, and I haven't checked that. But it worked pretty well on the 5mm needles. I did the Cat Bawdy Mebius cowl cast on, and I'll put a link to the YouTube video on that. It's a little bit fiddly to start with. The first row feels quite faffy. You're worried that you've dropped stitches, and you have to kind of just go with the process and trust the process for the first row or two. But after that, you just keep knitting and knitting and knitting, and you end up working both sides at once. When I say both sides, I mean both sides of the width of the cowl. So this is your cast on row in the middle here. So I started off doing simple seed or moss stitch. I then moved on to stripes of stocking stitch and reverse stocking stitch, and then I just did a couple of rows for the edge. I felt as though it was getting really wide. When it was on the needles it felt really wide, but now it's off the needles it doesn't. But given that it's folded double to fit around the neck, I think it's wide enough. So my final few rows were just alternating rows of knit and knit one, purl one, just so that it didn't curl over at the edges. And then I just did a loose cast off or bind off. I tend to do, as my default setting, a suspended bind off. So that's the one where you hold the stitch on the right hand needle as you knit into the next stitch, so it kind of stretches it out a little. That probably made no sense at all. If I get a chance I'll do some casting off to show you. If not, I'll do it in a later video. But yeah, it's a suspended cast off, and I find that gives the right sort of tension. In an ideal world I'd have done an I-cord bind off on this to give it absolutely the right amount of stretch and a nice edge and would hold it all out. but it was 200 odd stitches, and I've just noticed a drop stitch. Oh, I need to work on that. Okay, I have a drop stitch which I shall repair very shortly. Yeah, so an I-cord bind off would have been beautiful, and of course because of the way you work this, it would have gone on both ends, so it would have been effectively your cast on and cast off at the same time. That doesn't make sense, but you'd have been dealing with both sides of the cowl. But it was 200 odd stitches, and my patience was beginning to run out on this, I'll be honest. So gave that idea a miss and decided to just do a nice even cast off instead. That's about it. Once I've repaired it, I hope that someone likes it. Certainly when they feel it, they will. I mean, the colour isn't going to be to everyone's taste. It is quite bright, but it is such a lovely, warm feeling item that I'm hopeful that someone will want to buy it. And if not, I'll wear it because it feels lovely. If you've seen earlier episodes of this podcast, you may remember that at the beginning of this year I made a cowl as part of a knit along, and I really enjoyed the process. I also enjoyed the cowl very much because it had a lot of techniques that I had not used before. I then started another knit along that was a stranded work bag, and it just kind of wasn't working for me, and I said I really shouldn't do knit alongs, but I never listened to my own advice, especially when it's reasonable and quite good. So I then started a third, which was a shawl, and I'm giving up on it. So those of you who have done the Oshara shawl, it's not even easy to say, let alone knit, or those who are working your way through it, lovely, because it is a pretty thing. This is as far as I'd got, which I think was barely even week 2, and this thing finished ages ago. I didn't dislike the process necessarily. Quite interesting to do. There's a lot of the colour work is done by slipping stitches rather than conventional stranded work, so that was quite interesting to process. The lace is very pretty. I was debating at the time about the colour from this first yarn that I used going all over my hands, so I need to still answer the question of whether the colour catcher sheets work with that, and I will do because I will use it. But this, as you can see, I've taken it off the needle and it ain't gonna happen, not for me. It was a brave choice for me because, well, a couple of reasons really. I've already got another shawl on the go because I have the second large Faroese shawl happening, and also this is knitted from the conventional way. It's knitted getting larger and larger, and I'm not good at rows getting longer as I work through a project. I am better off making things the way that I'm making the other Faroese shawl, which is starting with hundreds and hundreds of stitches and then getting smaller. And perversely, what actually put the nail in the coffin for me was when the pattern appeared in Interweave Knits. Now, it's beautiful. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this pattern. It's lovely. But I looked at that and I thought, oh, that's that shawl. And felt nothing. Didn't feel, oh, I should get on with that. Felt I need that in my life. I just thought, oh, that's that shawl. It's really big. Ugh. And nothing at all wrong with the pattern. Apologies to Susanna IC, or Susanna, I don't know how you pronounce her name, because her surname is just spelled IC. Assuming that is her surname and not, I've got a double-barrelled name, so quite often I'm known as Leslie AH because it's easier, so maybe that's her thing too. But yeah, apologies to her because it is a beautiful shawl, but it's not for me. So I'm going to rip that out, put the yarn back in the cupboards and start again. And it's a shame because I've actually cut the balls where I've started stuff and then had to change colours and that. So that's a bit of a shame because that's then going to put knots in whatever I use the yarn for. But these are my decisions, and putting it back into stash means it will get used, whereas this could languish in the bag for a long time, and these yarns are far too nice to do that with. So, a sad tale of things not working out. Nothing's ever lost, like I say. Different technique, I've used that, that's very interesting, but it ain't for me. So back in the stash it goes. Deleted on Ravelry. We will never speak of this again. Right, well, we're definitely back at work. I'm back in the car, back wearing black. There's a song in there somewhere. That might be this month's title. And yes, a different crematorium actually, or a different cemetery to be parked in. One of the local crematoria is currently being refurbished. The chapel is all being done up and made super fancy and nice. So ceremonies are happening in the cemetery chapel, which is kind of 200 yards away, or I mean, I can go like that, and the crematorium's over there and the cemetery's right in front of me. And it's a bit of a pain logistically for a lot of people, but it means services can still go ahead, and that's what matters. So yeah, we're here for a few weeks, I think, whilst the work is being done. And it's all fun and games, because it's not set up in the same way for music and stuff like that. So we've got to work on good old-fashioned CDs rather than the automated downloaded system. So that's a bit of a pain, particularly as I made the mistake of saying, oh, here's the music that the family would like. If there's anything I can do to help, let me know. And they said, oh, great, yeah, you can look after that. Okay. So I feel a little bit like I'm conducting a wedding and someone says, oh, can you look after the rings as well? No, it's too scary. So there's just that, it's another thing to think about, and I worry that my attention to detail isn't quite what it should be anyway, so I don't like, I think it's either a Larson cartoon or Homer Simpson, where it says if one more thing goes out in my brain, something else has to go out the other way. And I feel like that sometimes, I think we all do. Yeah, but it's only for a few weeks, and hopefully the new crematorium chapel will be singing, dancing, bells, whistles, video cameras, lights, camera action. Ba-ba-da-ba-ba-ba. Yes, I'm working on my fluffy. Now, this was going to be a twiddle muff, but the more I think about it, the more I'm wondering if that's a good idea, because I'm not sure how robust these yarns are. So although they'll give a nice texture, I wouldn't want someone who uses a twiddle muff to be choking on bits of fibre. So I might have to think of another use for this. Quite what that would be. I mean, it could become a cushion cover, actually, if I stick to a similar colour palette. Be quite funky. But, yeah, that's kind of what we're doing. I was thinking of next year changing my car makes, and instead of doing the twiddle muffs and the hats, I would perhaps do cats' blankets. Years ago we had a cat from the local RSPCA, and when they go to their new home, they go with a blanket which they've been laying on whilst they've been at the shelter, and so it's a familiar scent for them. So Pussycat, that was her name was Spud, and she came home with her blanket and never went near it again, obviously, so that got washed and given back to them. But because the cats take the blankets with them, they need a constant supply. So I think I'll make a few of those next year, just for something different. I mean, all of these projects are using up scraps and bits and pieces that I've got, so they may well be dictated by the resources rather than the intent. But I just fancy a bit of a change. It's not like me, is it? So the sun is shining for October. Very warm for October, actually. And I had better go and get organised and make sure my CD plays, because if it doesn't, I've got the music backed up on my tablet and a speaker, but it'd be a lot easier if I can use their CD player, because I think that would be a lot louder. Wish me luck as you wave me goodbye. People, I am back in the I'm calling it the temporary chapel, although it's actually a very old building. The music kind of worked the other day, not entirely smooth, bit of a cock-up, frankly, but not disastrous, so it was fine. Not as slick as I would like it, but I want funerals to be smooth but not slick, and this one wasn't quite as smooth as I would want, but these things happen. Now I'm going to talk about yesterday, which is all about the knitting community, and one of the reasons why we all love it so much, because I had the great pleasure of meeting Barbara and her lovely husband Dennis. Now Barbara, if you don't know, she presents the Flame and Fibre podcast. Flame and Fibre because she's also a lamp worker. She does glass work, and she is just the loveliest person. They're on a big trip. They're going from the States to Egypt, and they had a few days in London, and she asked if I had any chance of getting there, and I did, and we had a lovely day together yesterday. It's kind of weird because meeting someone for the first time that you feel so close to because of watching each other's podcasts, and didn't really have any doubts that I would like her very much. Obviously terrified she'd think I was dull as dishwater, but thankfully she seemed to like me, so thanks, Barbara. Dennis, absolute sweetheart, very intelligent man, and much better at finding his way around London than I am. I had a street map, a little A to Z, which I think I must have bought it a while ago because it said new for 2004. So I've had it a while. But I mean, the places we were going to, they haven't changed, so that's not the issue. But it's not as fast as the very good GPS-powered app that Dennis had on his phone, because I am rubbish at finding my way around London. So I knew roughly, Covent Garden. It's kind of behind those buildings, I think. Yeah, that's really useful. But no, we had a lovely day. We had great weather, which helps. And we met at a museum and had a look around there. It's the John Soanes Museum. It's one that I'd never been to before, although I'd heard of. I suggested a few to Barbara and Dennis, and they've been to London lots of times, so they've seen a lot of the attractions, the museums, all of those things, and they'd never been to the John Soanes, so they were interested to see that. It's kind of interesting, but it's a bit weird. Basically, this gentleman was an architect, 19th century. His museum is three houses next to each other that he owned, and it has a lot of stuff in it. There's the sarcophagus of the father of Ramesses II. There are Greek statues. There are pieces of Roman and ancient Greek architecture, slabs of, I can't think of the word, but the stuff on walls, the decoration, all of that. And there are just bits of it everywhere. So it can feel quite busy. It's also a house that is a bit of a rabbit warren in terms of finding places, lots of little kind of nooks, crannies and cubby holes. But really interesting. Unfortunately, they said nothing is labelled, so because of the nature of the exhibits, nothing is labelled. So buy a guidebook. So I did. Nothing in the guidebook either. It might mention one or two significant pieces, but given how much stuff was in there, really that was a bit disappointing. But one of the highlights is in the Soanes Museum is the original of Hogarth's Rake's Progress, the 8 paintings, and they're in this picture room, and they're behind. The best way I can describe it is if you can imagine window shutters but against the wall, and on the outside of the window shutters, which when you're just standing in the room you just think is ordinary wood panelling, you've got paintings, but then you can open them up and there are paintings on the inside as well. And inside, the Rake's Progress, and we had this kind of talk through. Really interesting stuff. So yeah, it was a good day. We then had a walk along the river, went down to the river and walked along there, and then went to, we spent a bit of time in Covent Garden. We just went and had a cup of tea, and none of us were that interested in shopping, so we didn't hang around in Covent Garden, so we had the walk instead. And then we went and had afternoon tea at Fortnum and Mason, which was delightful. Really, really was. And just sat and chatted. The the waiter came up. I mean, they didn't hurry us at all. They didn't rush us. But at one point, we'd been sitting there for quite some time, and probably a couple of hours, and Barbara said to the waiter, "What time does the room close?" And he said, 6 o'clock. And she said, "OK, what time is it now?" He said, 6:30. Now, there were lots of people there, still in there, so we weren't the last to leave, but we had our time in there. But bless her, Barbara, I said she does lamp works. She has made and given me these beautiful stitch markers. Look at that little piggy face. I'm holding this up very badly. Absolutely gorgeous. Marvellous. Absolutely lovely. So pretty. All these little flowers. So, Barbara, thank you for your company, for spending some of your vacation time with me, for these, and just for being lovely. Thank you so much. So I will link to Barbara's podcast in the notes underneath the video. Just a lovely day. And now back to life, back to reality, back to the graveyard. That's actual, not figurative. So I'm going to do some knitting. I've got a few minutes. And I'd like to say a big thank you. I put a call out on Instagram because I'm back at work, so I haven't done much knitting, and asking if there were any questions. And there were lots. And I think what I'll do is kind of like 20 minutes worth of questions this month. And then rather than make it a whole Q&A session, I'll hold some over for next month. This is also in case I don't do much knitting next month either. And the first one I'm going to tackle is possibly the most controversial and may well land me in a storm of unhappy people and people who think I'm stupid and who disagree with me. And that's fine, that's their right. So if I suddenly have a big dip in viewer numbers, I'll know that I've upset people. I really don't intend to. I'm not going out of my way to be obnoxious. But it's an interesting topic. And this question, very kindly posed by Ferret and Gibbon. Thank you very much. I know you. I know what you feel about this. We've had this conversation before. See what you did there. But it is a valid question, and I thank you for raising it. And Ferret and Gibbon asks about the pricing for selling items at craft fairs. And when I first saw the question, I thought, because we all know that crafting takes a lot of time and that we should be recompensed for that time. And that means if we were to sell a pair of hand-knitted socks, it would cost several £100s. We also know that very, very few people are going to spend several £100s on a pair of socks. And it is a real tricky dilemma, and there are lots of factors involved. Now, as this podcast goes up onto YouTube, I will be at a craft fair, or a bazaar, but a craft fair effectively, selling stuff I've made, and selling stuff I've made at a loss. And some of it will be at a loss on the yarn, let alone on my materials. And again, you are entitled to think, well, then you're an idiot. You're an insult to all crafters. How dare you? What's wrong with you? I say this because I've asked the same questions and made the same comments on myself. It is a really tricky question, and I would love to be in a world where it would be the norm to sell crafts at a reasonable price for the time it takes to make them. Unfortunately, I'm not in that world. If you are, good luck to you, seriously. I have a friend who is an artist, and she also makes some jewellery pieces, usually enamelled. And she and I were having this conversation once, and she was saying that her jewellery pieces will go for tens of pounds. Her artwork will go for hundreds of pounds. And even allowing for the extra time she may take on her paintings, it's still a big difference. If you were to work it out as an hourly rate, she gets much, much better paid for artwork, for her paintings, than she does for her jewellery.
There's also the issue that she doesn't sell as many paintings as she does jewellery pieces. And that might be because of the marketplace. People perhaps want more jewellery than they want paintings. And it may be because of the cost. But as a craftsperson, she earns considerably less than she would as an artist. And I am well aware that by selling the pieces I've made cheaply, and I'll use the word cheap, I'm not ashamed. Well, I'm a bit, but yeah. I am perpetuating that. I am aware of that. I think my biggest counter-argument in all of this is I'm not selling her work. I'm not selling her short. I am potentially selling the community short, and it's not my intent, but I've got all this stuff and I want to find a home for it. And it comes down to almost supply and demand economics. I remember doing a craft show quite some time ago, and it was not long after I got my loom, so I'd made loads of scarves. And the first one I ever made was okay, but it was the first one I ever made, and it was in 100% acrylic yarn, so we weren't talking about luxury fibres. So I put it up for sale at a very, very cheap price. And a few hours into the craft fair, someone I know who's a crafter came round and looked at this, and she just said, "Oh, you're taking the..." Well, she might have said Mickey, but I don't think she did. I said, "Oh, yeah." She said, "That is too cheap. That is just..." and she was a bit angry, and she has every right to be. She said, "That is just too cheap, too cheap." And I said, "Yeah, but it hasn't sold yet. No one's come along and thought, oh, that's a bargain. I'll snaffle that away." Now, I think it may have sold by the end of the day, but it's not as if my booth was empty half an hour after the craft show had started. So although my stuff wasn't expensive and was probably too cheap generally, it wasn't too cheap for the people buying it. And this is the difficulty. I'm going to go round and round in circles on this. I mean, I am someone who can have an argument in an empty room anyway, so I am going to go round and disappear up my own logic in this one. But it is just incredibly difficult. And it's this disconnect between what people want to charge and should charge and rightly charge and earn themselves a decent hourly rate and value their craft. And it's the disconnect between that and what people are prepared to pay. And I don't think we can ever... ever's too long. I can't see a time when we will reconcile that. I would like to. I also understand that there are some craft markets, perhaps in bigger cities, where it is possible to command a more reasonable recompense for your work. I would love to see that filtered out, cascaded out. But I don't know that it's going to happen. I'm just rambling and being negative, and I really don't want to. Ultimately, I am making a decision based on the things that I have made and the time I have spent on them, and therefore it's my decision. And although on one level I understand that I represent everyone who's ever picked up a knitting needle or a scarf, a loom or a crochet hook, and am underselling them too, I can understand why people get very angry about this. But I'm only selling my work. I'm not selling theirs. And that assumes I sell it. I could come home with every piece that I've taken there and not sold a thing. I don't know what's going to sell. I can't imagine I will sell out of all stock because I'm not pricing it that cheap. I'm just pricing it cheaper than I should. But particularly in the area that I live, no one is going to spend 25, 35, 55 quid on a hand-knitted scarf. And I'm about to run out of memory time on this phone, which is a shame. So I shall carry on with this at another juncture. Apologies for the light. No, that's not going to make any difference. The way my wheel is, this is how I'm recording. So I shall try and sit here so you have the delight of seeing my face. Hello. Yeah, ran out of memory yesterday, but actually that was probably just as well, because it then gave me a bit of thinking and processing time, and continuing this issue of the value of what we sell at craft fairs. I was thinking about it from a buyer's point of view, not necessarily buying finished objects, but the things that we buy as crafters. And so a ball of, or a hank of, say a decent fingering weight 4-ply yarn, probably looking at sort of upwards of £20. If you see a skein or a hank available for £5, what do you think? Now, you might think that it's not going to be very good quality. You might think that the dyer is underselling. You might think that it's some kind of second. You might think they're just trying to get rid of stock. Or you might think, bargain, thanks very much. Or all of the above. So yeah, we would question a skein of yarn being sold at such a reduced price. However, when you see a free pattern on Ravelry, I don't know about you guys, but I don't think, oh, well, that's not going to be as good if it's a free one, or they haven't spent the same time on it, or all patterns should be free. If this designer can do it, why can't everyone else? None of that crosses my head. I just think, oh, that's great, that's free, that's very generous of them. So there seems to be a different perception according to what it is that we're buying. That doesn't answer any of the questions, but it's just another kind of thought process in the mix. I think we're trying to square the circle on this one, and we're never going to come to a happy answer for everybody. But I don't want this to be the world according to Les, even though clearly it is, because it's my podcast, so it is kind of one-way street. But I am very interested in what people think. However, because this is a bit of a contentious issue, I don't want it to turn into a rolling theme. And this week's argument will be this, I think. So what I'm suggesting is, if you have a point you'd like made about this that's not something I've already brought up, please do put it in the comments. I'm genuinely interested in what people think. What I'll do is I'll read out those comments in the next podcast so that people have an opportunity to have their views heard. But then I'm probably going to draw things to a close there so that it doesn't then become a kind of rolling thing. So I'm going to put it to bed. What I might also do is, after that, I might open up a thread on the Ravelry group, so if people do want to continue having that conversation, you're more than welcome to. Subject to normal, rules of be nice people. But I don't want it to become the main thrust of the podcast. So I'm going to do that, I think. So any thoughts, comments, please do add them to the comments section below the video. I'll read them out next month. I mean, if it's people just kind of reiterating what's already been brought up, then I may not read them. But anything that's a particularly new idea or a different way of thinking about it, of course, I'll read it out. And then I'll kind of bring things to a close on the podcast. But like I say, I'll open up a thread on the Ravelry group if people want to carry on having the conversation. So thanks again to Ferret and Gibbon for raising the question, because it is an interesting one. And it'd be interesting to see how many times I can use the word interesting in this podcast. But it would be good to know what people think, both from the point of view of being a seller and a buyer, because I think that's where the disconnect happens. But I could be completely wrong. I mean, I can only see things from my own perspective. I try to understand other people's points of view, but essentially my experience forms my knowledge and my understanding. Your experience will be different, so you probably have a different take on things. So please do get involved in the conversation if you'd like to. And yeah, thank you very much, Ferret and Gibbon, for raising the question, and for those of you who are interested in carrying it on. That's assuming you are, of course, but I'm always very appreciative of the comments that people add, and I'm sure that there'll be some among you who have thoughts on it, so it'd be great to hear what they are, so thank you for that. I will answer some other questions, but I need to do that when I'm at home, because I'm currently talking to you on my phone, which is where I would find the questions. So I'm probably going to curtail the car podcasting right now, because there's been quite a lot of it this month, actually. Which kind of reflects my month, that I've spent more time in the car than I have anywhere else. But yeah, so I'll bring things to a close. If you're interested in what I'm working on, it's another panel for the panel jacket, the Carol Lapin inspired design. This will actually be the 4th of the side panels. There are 8 altogether. You've got the central back, and then you've got 2 side panels each side of that, and then the sleeves. Given the way the yarn's looking, it's actually looking quite promising at the moment. Now, I'm not suggesting at this point that I will have enough yarn for the entire garment, because that way madness lies. But it is looking quite promising. So I next need to work out what I want to do with the sleeves. And my thought on that is to have it not in lots of panels. I'm thinking actually of just dividing the sleeve into 2. So just creating 2 panels, kind of that shape, so that you've got a central line which will go up the middle of the sleeve and will be seamed like the rest of the jacket, and then the shaping underneath. So I need to do some maths and some calculations on that, and I'll make the sleeve panels next, and then see how much of this yarn, which is the Ranco, that I have left, because I do have some Noro, and I started to make a panel in it, and I'm not entirely convinced the colours are going to work. They're coming out quite brown and green, and because this has got a lot of pink in it, I'm not really sure that that's going to be a good balance. I have got some more grey, plain grey yarn of this weight, which was one of the hanks that my husband brought me back from Scotland earlier in the year. So I may well use that. So if that's the case, there'll be sort of like a panel of colour, and then a plain grey one. I've also got to decide what I want to do for edging and neck, whether I want to do a big kind of, not a shawl collar, I mean not like this one, but a kind of panel that goes up and all the way round. And that may also be partly dictated by what the yarn situation is once I've got all the other pieces finished and put together. So that will be very much a working on what's left, because I quite fancy that idea, but I do want it to be all in the same yarn. Now, whether that's the grey that I use at the hems, whether it's this other grey that I may incorporate, or whether I'll have enough to do it in the Ranco, whichever I use, I want it to be all the same. I don't want it to be blocks or stripes. I think that won't look too good. More of the questions will be answered. Like I say, I'll do that when I'm back in my usual place. I don't know that I'll get all of the questions answered this time, because I had such a lovely lot of them. So thank you again. I really like this being an interactive process. I can sit and talk for England, as we know, but I don't have to. It's nice to know what you think, to hear your thoughts, to feedback as far as possible. So thank you for the questions. I will answer some this month, and those that I don't get to this month, I'll hold over for next month. So please do add more if you'd like them answered. And they don't have to be yarn or knitting related. I mean, obviously, people aren't necessarily going to be that interested in what I had for breakfast this morning, toast. But people might be interested in, I don't know, stuff to do with my work, or a few people have asked about the drumming, so I'll probably talk about that in a sec. Yeah, just anything that you think, oh, what's that like? I can only ever give you my perspective. I have 51 years on the planet, but a lot of them have been spent in the same place, so don't have a vast breadth of experience to share. But if you are interested, the problem isn't getting me to talk. The problem is getting me to stop. Right, well, firstly, I'm going to read this off my tablet. Viking Purple Penguin asked for more gratuitous dog moments, please. So I'm going to answer this next question with a dog on my lap. So a question from Running It My Way. What was your first project? I can't actually remember. And this says probably more about me than I'd like to. I can remember my first failed project. Can you, Mum? Yes, I can. Don't worry, I won't do a lot of talking to the dog. I had been knitting probably a few years because I started when I was about 4. So I dare say my first project was a scarf for a doll or a teddy bear or something like that. And I think I must have been about 10 or 11. And I wanted to make myself my first piece of clothing. Yes, I wanted to make my first piece of clothing. And that was what at the time, bearing in mind please, this was the late 70s. At the time it would have been called a tank top. We'd now call it a sleeveless vest or something of equal class rather than tank top. And I remember it was 2 colour. I think I had 2 shades of blue, a darker blue at the bottom, and then there was this diagonal colour work pattern, and it was just 1 stitch dark blue, 1 stitch light blue, and then the next row, it would all knitted flat, and the next row would be exactly the same but moving along one, which would actually make it more of a checkerboard, wouldn't it? It must have been 2 and 1 or something like that. But it was this diagonal pattern. And it took ages. And I remember my mother was reticent because she was worried about basically investing in the yarn. It wasn't going to be cheap. She wasn't worried about spending the money. She was worrying about it being wasted if I didn't make the item. And I said, yes, of course I'll make the item. I can knit, I can knit. Well, it just took me so long, and I remember that each row of either the front or the back took half an hour. And needless to say, I got bored and gave up. So Mother was right. Mothers invariably are. So although I don't remember my first project, I do remember that first failure. So thank you for the question, Running It My Way. That Viking Purple Penguin asked, as well as more gratuitous dog moments, is Marmite, love or hate? Now, for anyone outside the UK, I don't know how widely available Marmite is. It's a yeast extract spread. Oh, someone's bored. Okay. So it's a yeast extract spread that is usually put on toast or to flavour twiglets or it's eaten. And there was an ad campaign probably 20 years ago now, Marmite, you either love it or you hate it. And it's one of those phrases that kind of went into the language. So people talk about a Marmite situation because you either love it or you hate it. Or they'll say, I'm a Marmite person, me, you'll either love me or hate me. And when people say that, I tend to hate them. I've got to be honest. But yes, so Marmite, love it or hate it. So I'm going to say something very contentious. I'm not that keen, but I don't mind it. Would never be my first choice, but I wouldn't dismiss it out of hand. So I don't think that makes me unique. It just means the power of marketing isn't as strong as we thought. And one other quick question, which is from Vivi Knits, who writes, Hi Leslie, looking forward to another episode. Thank you very much. Where is your favourite place to knit? Well, I'm sitting in it. This is my knitting chair. Sorry, I've got old clothes laying over the back of it. An old, not an old, but a hoodie. And I have everything to hand. And I'm going to show you this, but it is very messy. I've told you before I'm an untidy person. And you're now going to see how true that is. But we have all sorts of stuff around me. So all my notions are in here. Oh, something sticking there. That's a good advert, isn't it? So all my stitch markers, pom-pom makers. This is the panel jacket over there. You can see the come here, the drops pattern. I've got other things going on in here. I've got a baby blanket that I'll talk about at some point, probably once it's finished. And my feet are resting on a box which holds all my needles. Sorry, there's a lovely view of my thighs. Sorry about that. Yeah, so this is probably my favourite place to knit. The light, it's an IKEA one, but it's very bright. And I have my charger here for my phone and my tablet, so I can watch my podcasts here. I can listen to the radio. Telly's over there, but I don't even know if our TV would allow us to connect through to the podcasts. We've had it quite a while, so it's possibly not that technologically advanced. So I tend to watch podcasts on my tablet, and I do that here as well. And yeah, this is probably my favourite place to knit. It's where I have all my stuff around me. So this is my little corner of the sitting room, and from here I quite often see my husband asleep, bless him, but he sometimes, sees me asleep as well, so I'm not going to say that all the blame is with him. And it's just a cosy corner, and I do have a fireplace, so when it's really cold I can light a real fire and get that going. Yeah, so this is my favourite place to knit. As a sort of general rule, I mean, probably if you were to say anywhere in the world, then, some swanky hotel bar with flunkies providing me with drinks and snacks on a regular basis. But in the day-to-day, the usual, this is it. This is my knitting corner.
Thanks again for all of the questions. We're just getting over the hour mark on this month's podcast, so I'm gonna just answer one more, and then I'll save the others for future episodes. So I've got my list here, and I'm really grateful. There's actually one that I don't know that I can answer, but I'm hoping that some of you can. It's from Beth Chip. Now, part of her stuff is about living in a small town in the UK. That I can do. She's asked, are all of the public schools government run, so state schools, part of the Church of England? Well, as far as I know, about a third are affiliated to the Church of England, but I don't know of any that are actually part of the Church of England. Trouble is, I don't have anything to do with schools or the Church of England, so I'm not in a position to answer. But if there are any teachers out there or people with kids in schools that can shed some light on that, I'd be very grateful to hear your knowledge. So the last question I'm going to answer today is from Amethyst Lady 64. I think I know who you are. And she asks, how many things do you think you've knitted since you started? Ooh. I had to work on the law of averages in the end. And I reckon about 20 items per active year of knitting. That's based on what I've been doing since I've been on Ravelry, because that's a nice way of measuring it. Now, although I've been knitting since I was 4, those years have not all been active. I've had times when I haven't done much at all. So I've averaged it out to about 30 years of active knitting. So that would make it about 600 items. That's a bit scary, isn't it? But thank you very much for the question. That really made me stop and think. And I'm afraid I haven't got a definitive answer, but it's nice to know that I haven't been wasting that time. Thank you. Now, all you lovely people, I said at the beginning of this podcast and the beginning of the month when I did the intro, that if we got to 2,000 subscribers, which I didn't think we would, that I would have a giveaway. And bless your cotton socks, cotton, wool, MCN, any kind of configuration. We've got to over 2,000 subscribers, so thank you so very, very much. It's rather taken me by surprise. Life does, you know that, but it's rather taken me by surprise. So I can't tell you yet what the prize will be, but I'll get something nice, honest. I may even see if there's anything beautiful at the bazaar, a little something that I think would appeal to a crafter. If not, I'll find some nice yarn and there will be a nice prize. So thank you to everyone who's subscribed. Now, in order to enter for the prize, I was thinking about celebrations. Not the chocolates, just generally celebrations. And I was wondering what your favourite festival is, or what your favourite celebratory festivity is. And there are so many to choose from. It could be religious, Eid, Diwali, Christmas, Hanukkah. I'm completely ignorant on most matters religious, but there may be a festival that you particularly enjoy. It could be a national event, 4th of July, Australia Day, one of the Thanksgivings, Guy Fawkes Night, whatever it is that you like. Or it may be a local one, that strange cheese rolling thing in Gloucestershire, or locally to me, Jack in the Green, lots of local festivals. So something that may be local to you, maybe your favourite event of the year. So I would be delighted to find out what it is that you like, which festival, which celebration really makes you happy. So apologies I haven't got organised enough to arrange a prize, but it will be something that's suitable to go anywhere in the world to anyone who likes craft. I will make sure of that. And thank you again to everyone who's subscribed, who's liked, who's added comments, who's given the thumbs up, who's pressed the bell thing. Technician at work as always. Just thank you all very, very much for all your support. You have no idea how much it means to me, so thank you. That's it for October. Definitely autumn in the Northern Hemisphere. If you're in the Southern Hemisphere, hope your weather is glorious. And I hope that whatever you do throughout the rest of this month and November brings you joy. I hope you have time to do the crafting that you love and that it brings you happiness. See you at the end of next month. Thank you so much. Bye bye.